Hi, Drew. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. So today I want to talk about vacation homes. And I know there's a lot of beautiful places in Washington, beautiful lakes, beautiful places on the ocean that you can buy and have as a second home, or a vacation home. But a lot of people don't know what that takes to actually buy one. Like, do you need 20% down? Do you is it you get the same interest rate as you do as your primary residence? Like, what takes to get a second home?
Yeah. So second homes are awesome. I'm sure everyone, anyone who is interested in real estate at all, just would love to have a second home. They're a little bit harder to get than a primary residence, not because they're particularly more challenging to qualify in and of themselves, but most of the time you have to remember that with a second home, they're not income producing. And so what you're doing is you're basically taking your primary residence, even if you're just renting, taking your primary residence cost of living. So let's say your mortgage is $3,000, and then you look at a smaller home that the mortgage would be $2,000. That means you still need to qualify with $5,000 worth of total debt, because you cannot use any income from a second home. And so it does make it a little bit more challenging, but you have pretty similar down payment requirements to your primary residence. You generally have to do a little bit more down. So you can do as low as 5% down. You can't do the 3% down first time home buyer concept, but that's still pretty good. With that said, the rates are going to be much higher on a second home than on a primary residence. And that actually wasn't always the case for a long while. Actually, just, still within my career, they were priced exactly the same, primaries and secondaries. That has now shifted, and secondary homes are now the same price as investment properties. And those have always been really expensive. So actually, I want to quickly share my screen. I'm going to show you guys how Fannie Mae kind of breaks it out. And you don't have to memorize it. You can, maybe take this video and pause it at some point later and take a look and just get a general feel for things. So let me share my screen. Which screen am I sharing? This one. So can you see it?
I can see it, yeah.
All right. So this is what's called the Fannie Mae, loan level price adjustment matrix. It sounds complicated, but really all it is it basically is telling you what kind of the adjusters for Fannie Mae. So you can imagine if you're buying a primary residence, you got 60% down, 800 credit score, you're going to have, no adjustments. It means your pricing is going to be as good as it gets, basically. And then as it goes down here into these other corner of the room, it gets more expensive. And so this actually applies to all purchase transactions. But what we are really going to focus on is down here, the second home. And now you can see second home is aligned with investment property just above it. So they're the exact same. And this is not an increase in the rate. This is an increase in points. So let's imagine that in this scenario, you're buying something for 25% down, you have perfect credit, and you would otherwise have no adjusters. And let's just say, and this is not a rate quote, but let's just say the rate's 7%. If you come down here, you would add 2.125 points to that. So that would mean that you are now paying 2.125 points to get that 7% interest rate. Whereas if you're buying as a primary, you wouldn't pay any points at all. And then you go down the line and it gets even more extreme. So we're at 4.125. And generally speaking, if we're talking about rates at the moment, it's about 25 basis points. So that's points here, equals about an eighth in rate. And so if you look at 4 points, we're talking about probably about 2% higher interest rate just to get that 5% down compared to a primary residence. And so it's pretty significant. And that's why, generally speaking, when we're looking at either an investment property or a second home, you want to go with at least 25% down, because even though it's still 2 1/8, it's much better than 4 1/8. Not to say you can't do it, but it is it will hurt the bank. But generally speaking, I'm going to go over actually to these occupancy types, also from Fannie Mae. With second home, there's a couple of restrictions to it. And so, it has to be suitable for year-round occupancy. And one of the most important things that a lot of people can get tripped up on, depending on where you want to get your second home, is that it has to be a tangible difference from your primary residence. Typically, we look at that as 50 miles. And so if you live in the place as your primary residence, say like North Bend, and you're trying to get a second home in just somewhere 10 miles away, it's beautiful, it's forested, it's wooded, whereas your house is in a planned unit development, it's still going to run into issues because you're too close. And so that's an important thing for people to consider when you're looking at second homes, is the distance from your home. It does have to be, essentially, we can't think that it's your next door neighbor. You can't buy your second home in that regard next door. That would have to, we'd probably look at that as an investment property. Mind you, it doesn't change the pricing, but you just have to be aware of how we're going to structure the loan and what types of requirements you're going to put on it.
It's interesting that says it's restricted to 1-unit dwellings. So
yeah,
that's like one thing I didn't realize.
Yeah, and that's another thing is, and these guidelines were written when second home pricing was better than investment property. So these actually, I could see these changing. I don't have any information to tell me that they will, but in reality, these were designed because second homes used to be priced like primary residences. And so they were scared that people were going to call something a second home and then immediately turn it around and turn it into an investment property. And so by making it a 1-unit dwelling, you're basically ensuring it's not investment property. This is not something that's designed to build you, get you rental income, get you Airbnb income. It is designed for you to live there for less than half the year and let it basically sit vacant. That's not to say you can't rent it out. Generally speaking, a lot of people do, maybe Airbnb their second homes, but you can't use that rental income for qualifying. So that's not going to help you in buying it. It might help you offset some of that cost, but it's not designed to be income producing.
That's really interesting. Well, yeah. I think that's good to know, because then when you're going into this and you are thinking like, should I have this like as a year-round rental? But when you talk about like having investment, or when you have investment property, you have to have those contracts that are year-round, right? Like you're looking for that to be counted as income. Airbnb income doesn't actually count towards your income.
Right. There's a couple different ways you can look at it. So at least in the very beginning, when you're buying a place, let's say you wanted to buy a cabin, it's over 50 miles away, but you want to Airbnb it like 90% of the time. We would consider that an investment property. However, we wouldn't be able to use the Airbnb income to purchase it. With that said, as long as you have continuous Airbnb income and we can create an average, we can look at your tax returns and determine your income from that, regardless of if it's Airbnb or long-term lease. And that's just because we don't need your lease. Typically, when we're looking at a refinance or something down the line, we've had the home for a while, because all we need is the tax return. The tax return is really where we get all of your rental information from. If there's any question, if you're still collecting rent, I'm not sure what scenario that would come up, but they might ask for a lease. Generally speaking, though, we're looking for long-term rental, and we don't really care what it is, like how you're collecting it, as long as you're collecting it consistently, and we can create an average over the course of 2 years.
Nice. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, it's good to know, especially for people who have been renting out their houses and they're interested in refinancing in the future. Things you definitely have to consider is the higher interest rate right now, but it's good information to have, right?
Yeah, it's true. The higher interest rate it's going to make a second home a little bit more expensive. And you think, okay, what would this be if I paid for an Airbnb once a month? Is it going to be cheaper than owning a second home? Could be.
Well, yeah, that's true, but you don't get that equity long term, right? So
but you don't get that equity, exactly. So there's definitely a balancing act, and they can be really good investments, even though it's not technically an investment property. You're still owning a home, you're still building that appreciation, and if you think you're buying your second home in kind of a hot market or something that will be a hot market, you have that ability to grow. And so there's a lot of pros and cons to them, but ultimately, as far as buying them, it's the same as any other transaction. You have to have the funds, the income, the credit, And you can get the funds from anywhere. If you really wanted to go into the second home, one thing that can help is that when rates are, let's say your primary residence is not one of those historic 2% rates, right? Let's just say you have a 6% or a 7% interest rate. What you can do is you can actually take equity out of your primary residence at the better rate because it's your primary, and then apply that to the down payment for the second home. So as opposed to having, let's say, 50% equity and 90% equity in your, or excuse me, 50% equity in one and 20% in the other, you shift it so you have 75 in one and 75 in the other, and that way you get better pricing on kind of both. You're blending the two together, and you're washing that debt across the two properties. And really the goal is to make it so that that higher interest on the second home, you're keeping that loan as small as you can, even if it means pushing a little bit more loan onto your primary residence.
That's an interesting concept. It's actually a really good idea because debt is debt. And it just, if you can get it debt at a lower interest rate, that would be better. So
it's essentially debt is debt. There's tax implications, of course, which I won't go into because I'm not a CPA. But generally speaking, if you're going to have $1 million in debt with 500 here or 500 there or 200 here and 800 there, it's still going to be the same amount of debt. Interest rates are obviously important if you can try and balance those, and you want to push as much debt onto the lower interest rate as you can if you're going to have the same amount of debt.
That's really interesting. All right, well, thanks for sharing these tips today, Drew, and I look forward to hearing what you have next week. So bye, everyone.
All right, talk to you later.